Okay everyone, everything we have been doing in class has led up until this moment. We are about to begin your lesson plan project, which is going to account for 30% of your grade. I really want you to feel comfortable with the process of planning. I do know, however, this is going to change completely. It's going to change based upon, what subject you end up teaching, what grade level you end up teaching, and where you end up teaching. But I still want you to feel comfortable with this process because planning is such a huge component of being an educator. So for this project, you're going to create a year-long plan, a unit plan, and 3 lesson plans. So I did want to show you this visual that gives you the difference between them. Your year-long plan is everything you're going to be teaching throughout the year. So in North Carolina, that's 185 days. What are you going to be doing for 185 days? It's going to include all your objectives, your resources, any themes, and then year-long plans are typically required by your administration. I know for me as an educator, it just depended upon what school I taught. When I taught in Durham, I had to turn in every single lesson plan. When I taught here at Beaufort Middle, I had to turn in my year-long plan. So again, it just depends on your administrator and your school. Unit plans are essentially a theme. It could be ranging for 2 weeks to 4 weeks to 5 weeks to 6 weeks. This is all of a series of lessons put together that are themed around one particular subject. So for example, maybe I have a unit plan on circles, which I've been using as an example in this class. And then you have lesson plans. Lesson plans are your day-to-day. Lesson plans can range over a course of maybe 1 to 2 days, maybe even 3 days. They are very specific. They are listing out every single activity, every essential question. This is talking about one particular topic. So for example, if my unit is on circles, maybe my specific lesson plan for that day is finding the area of circles. So let's look at each one of these. So a year-long plan, again, we're talking about 185 days. Why would you do a year-long plan? This is going to be your roadmap for the year. So whenever I did my year-long plan, I would always do a day by day. So I would print out a calendar from August until June, and I would pencil in. Notice I said pencil, because your year-long plan is certainly going to change, especially as a first-year teacher. I think by the time I got into like year 5 and year 6, I looked back at my first year and I was like, what are you doing? So it is going to change. Write it in pencil. It helps you pace your content. So you need to cover every standard that's listed in your standard course of study. If you don't develop a year-long plan, you end up spending so much time on specific standards, you get to the end of the year and you're like, oh my gosh, like I didn't cover everything I needed to cover. So a year-long plan keeps you on pace. If you do have testing, so again, it just depends on the county you're in. So some counties do benchmark testing, so that might be every quarter or every 9 weeks. And then of course, if you're in grades 3 through high school, you're going to have end of year testing, end of course testing. So it helps keeps you on track so your students are ready for those tests. So how do you create a year-long plan? It's really focused around your standards. You really need to read, understand, print your standards. It's going to make sure that you're accountable for covering every standard. Now, notice in this example here, standards can be broken down. So it's not like you look at one standard and you're like, okay, well, I need to cover this in 1 day. No. Standards can be broken down into different units. You can chunk them into weeks. Also, some standards are related to one another. So for example, again, I'm comfortable with 7th grade math. In 7th grade math, you teach proportions, and that's in one standard. But in another standard in geometry, it talks about proportional reasoning and using proportions to solve for missing sides. So could I combine those standards into one unit? Yes, you could. So it's really important that you read, that you understand your standards, and you look for ways that you can either break apart a standard, or maybe you can combine some pieces of different standards and include them into one unit. So speaking of unit plan, again, a unit plan is a big idea or theme. So you've looked at your standards and you're like, okay, like for example, in this picture here, I can create a unit on the number system. And so in this unit may span, again, it could be a series of a couple weeks, it could be 6 weeks, completely up to you. Unit plans can typically be used from year to year with some modifications. Within your unit plan, just like in this picture here, you're going to have a breakdown of each individual lesson. So if my unit plan is the number system over here, maybe we'll talk about adding and subtracting integers is one of my lessons. Multiplying and dividing integers is another one of my lessons. And so some questions that you want to ask yourself when you develop a unit: is this entire unit aligned with my standards? Within the unit, you're also going to come up with your strategies, your teaching strategies. This is what we've been talking about all in this class. Have I used, you can see the big picture in this unit, have I used a balance of teaching strategies? Have I used a balance of, assessments that are going to meet the needs of my diverse learners? Also, by developing a unit plan and you sequence your lesson, you're going to make sure, like, oh, have I sequenced these clearly? Does it make sense that I'm starting at these kind of lower order thinking skills and I am developing some higher order thinking skills as I keep going? And then when you develop a unit plan, you're going to come up with a list of all the formative and summative assessments that you would like to use in this unit. And it really, again, gives you that big picture of, okay, at the end of this unit, when I give this summative assessment, is it measuring the standards and the objectives that I've created here? Now, finally, so you've got your year-long plan, 185 days, you've got your units that you're going to do throughout the year, and now we've got our day-to-day. You've been doing this in this class. It's just time for us to put it together. So this is where our backward design comes into play. So each one of our lesson plans, we're going to go through each one of the stages. What are our desired results? What kind of assessments are we going to be using in this lesson? And then what are our specific learning activities? So these are the daily steps that you're going to be using to complete your entire unit. I'm not asking that you come up with every single lesson that you're going to do in this unit. I'm asking you to come up with 3 of them. As a first-year teacher, it is very important that your lesson plans be detailed because you need a roadmap of how you're going to teach this lesson. It's going to keep you organized. It's going to provide you structure. When you are doing this project, I expect your lesson plans to be detailed enough so if I were going to pick up your lesson plan and teach it, there would be no question of what I would be doing in that lesson. So for some of you, the feedback that I gave you in stage 3 when you submitted that assignment was that it was not detailed enough. So for some of you, I noticed you were just like, well, I would just do this activity on this topic. If I was picking this up and I said, okay, I need to do some activity on this topic, I have no idea what you're talking about. Be very, 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 very specific. Detailed enough, again, step by step. I know exactly what you would be doing in that lesson. To me, if I had to have an analogy of lesson planning is kind of like following a recipe. So if you think about when you're cooking a recipe for the first time, if you're like me, you are glancing at that recipe like every 5 seconds. Like, wait a minute, I need this, and this is step 1, and this is step 2. Like, I gotta look at it over and over and over again the first time. And even the second time I cook it and the third time I cook something, I'm still gonna be referencing that lesson or that recipe over and over and over again. After you get some years under your belt as an educator, you might not have to glance at the recipe so frequently. Like, you're like, okay, I've got this now. And then when you're a seasoned educator, you're like, I just need to write down what topic I'm doing for today in my agenda book. Like, I've done this so many times, I don't need to glance back at the recipe anymore. Granted, lesson plans, again, I don't care if you're a 15-year, 20-year, 30-year vet teacher, you're always coming up with new and exciting ways to revamp your lessons and make them bigger and better, but it just becomes so much easier when you become a veteran teacher. I will say for me, one of the most overwhelming parts of being a first-year teacher was having to create everything. But as I'm going to show you in this project, which I'm going to give you the directions in just a second, there are a lot of resources out there to help teachers. A lot of things you don't have to create from scratch. We are one big community where we can borrow from one another. So I'm going to show you those resources in just a second. But just know, it is going to become easier as you get the years under your belt. It won't be quite as overwhelming as it is right now. So let's take a look at your project. So the first thing I want to mention to you about this project is that it is going to encompass 3 weeks. So it's a huge project. It's 30% of your grade. You can essentially treat this as your final exam in this class. I expect that you take all 3 weeks to work on it. This is not a project that you wait until Sunday at 11 p.m. to get started with it and it's due on Monday. I expect you to spread this out over the course of 3 weeks so it's not so overwhelming. Yes, spring break falls in the middle of this project, and I do want you to take a break, but I also want you to utilize that time to be working on the project. The only assignment that you will turn in for this first week is going to be an attendance check-in. This is just letting me know that, hey, you've read the project directions. What are you concerned about? Do you have any questions? What are you excited about? Did you read the statement about AI? How do you plan to use AI as part of this project, which we'll talk about in just a minute. If you keep scrolling here, these are the project directions. I'm not going to read them for you here. I will pull them up for you. I do expect that you read these project directions thoroughly. You will turn in 3 documents for this project: a year-long plan document, a unit plan document, and a lesson plan document. I'm providing you templates for each one of these, which I'll show you in just a minute. I will not accept your project unless it is using these templates. So I expect you to use the templates that I give you. If you give me something else, I will return it back to you and tell you to rewrite it. I want to spend a minute on AI usage. AI is one of the greatest tools we now have as teachers. It is essentially your teacher assistant in the classroom. Absolutely use AI for idea generation. Why would you not at this point? However, you are not to get AI to write you a lesson plan and copy and paste it as part of this project. If you do that, you're essentially becoming a substitute teacher because these are not your lesson plans. You have no ownership of them. It's very different teaching somebody else's lesson versus teaching your own. So my expectation is, yes, you use it to come up with active learning strategies, come up with differentiation strategies, and then you take what AI is giving you and you write it as your own in your lesson plan. You will be turning this project in through Copyleaks, which detects for AI and it detects for plagiarism. And at this point, I can certainly tell whether or not a lesson plan has been written by artificial intelligence. If you do copy and paste a lesson plan or a unit plan or a year-long plan from AI, I will give you a 0 for that assignment and we will have a meeting about it. The next thing to look at is your grading rubric. So this is how I'm going to have this grading rubric out as I'm grading these projects. Since this is your final exam in this class, I will be grading this a lot more stringently than I have graded other assignments. So make sure you read through this grading rubric before you turn in your project. I do want to show you each of the templates. So the first one is the year-long template that you're going to create. Everything in red is an example that I'm giving to you, so you want to delete that before you turn in this template here. You are going to assume that the year is 36 weeks. So I'm not asking you to do this daily, I'm asking you to do it weekly. So for example, you have a unit here in proportional reasoning. It's going to take 5 weeks, so it's going to be the first 5 weeks of my year. These are the standards I'm covering, these are my understandings, and these are my essential questions. So you're going to have a total of 36 weeks here, and I'm going to talk about some great resources that you have. You do not have to come up with this on your own. I've provided you resources that essentially you can just copy, make your own, but you can copy the ideas they have about the timing of each of your units. The next one is a unit plan template. So as we discussed previously, a unit plan is a series of lessons that are around a theme. So for example, I keep using this as an example in this class, but maybe I have a unit on circles. So what is my summary of that unit? What are the standards I'm teaching? The essential questions, big ideas, what type of active learning activities or learning tasks are my students going to complete? The skills they're going to develop, the vocabulary that's going to be covered, what type of assessments am I going to do in that entire unit? How am I going to differentiate? What technology am I going to need? And then this part right here I get a lot of questions on, so I want to stop for a minute. If I have a unit plan on circles, I'm going to cover things like area of a circle, which may be one day. I'm going to cover circumference of a circle, which may be one day. Maybe I'm going to do word problems centered around circles, and maybe that's going to be 2 days. So lesson plans don't necessarily have to just be for a day. They may be for a period of hours. They may be for multiple days. They may just be for 1 day. But I want to know within this unit, how many lessons are you going to teach? What are their titles going to be? It does not have to be the same number that's written in red here. It may be less, it may be more. It's completely up to you. And then within that unit, I want you to choose 3 lessons and create lesson plans for those lessons. I'm not going to go over this because you've been doing it in this class. It's just we've been spreading it out. Well, now it's time to put it together. So create 3 lessons. The template is all the same for all 3. Again, delete what's in red, and you're going to include your information here. Now let's talk about the resources that I've given you to help you. This is what I would certainly suggest using for your year-long planning. So there are some counties in North Carolina that do publish their year-long plans. So I've provided those to you. So for example, this is Moore County here. It has K through 12. So for example, I'm going to just go to, let's say, 2nd grade, for example, and I'm going to go to 2nd grade, let's say, math. This is a year-long plan for 2nd grade math. So 1st quarter, 2nd quarter, 3rd quarter, 4th quarter. This is going to help you decide, how much time to be spending on specific units. Again, does it have to look exactly like this county? No, it doesn't. But it gives you a really good idea of how long teachers are spending on particular units. I also gave you, Randolph County has great pacing guides for middle school and high school. I would say Moore County has the best ones, at least that I've seen, for elementary. I would love to give you Carteret counties, but unfortunately they are locked down, so you have to have permission, and I didn't want you to have to go through that in order to get to them. But these are great ones here to use as resources. And then down here at the bottom, you do not have to create a lesson plan from scratch. Again, you got AI for, again, idea generation, but there are so many lesson plans written by excellent teachers out there. So I just wanted to give you some resources to get started. OER Commons is a great one if you want literacy lesson plans, Read, Write, Think. History, if you are teaching history, there are so many great lesson plans. Actually, UNC Chapel Hill has created a lesson plan database. STEM lessons for those you teach in science and math. Share My Lessons have free great resources, and then PBS also has some free great lesson plans for you to use. There are certainly others out there as well. I hope you get excited with doing this project. I hope it gets you excited about creating your own plans and coming up with great ideas for engaging lessons for students. But if you have any questions at all when you're working on this project, please do not hesitate to reach out to me.